Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. So she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one Jesus loved, and said, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they've put him." So Peter and the other disciple started for the tomb. Both were running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent over and looked in at the strips of linen lying there, but did not go in. Then Simon Peter came along behind him and went straight into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. The cloth was still lying in its place, separate from the linen. Finally, the other disciple who had reached the tomb first also went inside. He saw and believed. They still did not understand the scripture that Jesus had to rise from the dead. Then the disciples went back to where they were staying. But Mary stood outside the tomb crying. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb and saw two angels in white seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. They asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" "They have taken my Lord away," she said, "and I don't know where they have put him." At this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not realize that it was Jesus. He asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it you are looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned toward him and cried out, "Teacher." Today is Easter Sunday. This is a Unitarian Universalist church. Therefore, if we're doing this thing right, this thing called Unitarian Universalism, then this very familiar story I just read should have elicited a wide diversity of responses from those of us gathered here this morning. And actually, I shouldn't say responses. Your responses to that story are not particularly interesting. What I really mean to say is, in a UU congregation such as ours, one would expect, one would hope that there would be represented here among us a wide diversity of relationships to this story. Some of us may have an adversarial relationship to this story, one that provokes anxiety, maybe even a little anger, because some of us were at one time compelled, coerced, to believe in the literal truth of this story as an historical event. At one time, some of us may have been threatened with an eternal and literal damnation if we even questioned the veracity of this story. And so perhaps some of us never fully came to terms with, never fully came to peace with this story. Some of us here this morning may have established a relationship of peaceful coexistence with this story, such that we feel free to use this story as a source of wisdom and inspiration and hope because we understand it as a metaphor, an allegory. We are not threatened by the Easter story because we interpret it as being but one of several mythological narratives incorporating the motif of a dying and resurrecting king or god. an archetypal motif that appears in religions and cultures across the entire world and across all time, from Sumeria to Egypt to Greece to Palestine to the Nordic lands to Britain and beyond. For some of us, this Easter story is simply a figurative tale symbolizing fertility, the cycle of the seasons, transformations, and hope. And some of us here this morning may have a far more intimate, a far more crucial relationship to this story. For some of us, this story represents a literal event that happened in human history approximately 2,000 years ago. Moreover, that event, for some of us, may have deep theological significance because without it, and without a belief in it, we would be doomed to an eternity of separation from that which we identify as the divine source. For those in this camp, this story is like an old friend. It offers great comfort. It is worthy not only of celebration, but also of jubilant publication. Now, to be honest with ourselves, if you happen to hold this third view of the Easter story, this being a UU church on an Easter morning, well, you're probably in a statistical minority. Our faith tradition, or at least certain streams of it, has a long history of being indifferent, if not sometimes downright hostile, to this particular interpretation of Easter. But as time passes, from my vantage point, I see that hostility slowly fading away, and I think that is partly due to our faith's increasing participation and leadership in meaningful interfaith work, which requires us to truly walk the walk when it comes to our expressed ideals of embracing theological diversity and committing ourselves to the celebration of religious pluralism. Now, on a personal level, I can tell you that although I personally no longer subscribe to this literalistic view of the Easter story, I find nothing particularly offensive or irrational about this interpretation. Now, is it somewhat far-fetched to believe that long ago a man died and came back to life after spending 2 evenings in the grave? Perhaps. But is that really any more far-fetched than believing that long ago some random amino acids in a pool of primordial soup coalesced into a single protein that eventually became Leonardo da Vinci, Albert Einstein, or Maya Angelou? Who can say? The point is, the story of the resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth means different things to different people. Whether that resurrection literally happened is not a question that we will answer this morning. Whether that resurrection as an event had any magic, miraculous, or metaphysical power is likewise a question beyond our scope. But what is clear, I hope, is that the story of the resurrection is immensely powerful, and it is a story that we should not be too quick to discard or overlook. We cannot afford to lose our stories. I'll tell you a quick story about stories that relates to this story. And in honor of Easter, it will include bunnies. The novel Watership Down by Richard Adams is an extended fable about a tribe of anthropomorphic rabbits who leave their home in search of a new land. Because it is such a fanciful, such a far-fetched tale, a tribe of talking bunnies on a quest, it is easy to dismiss it as nothing more than a whimsical children's story unfit for and unworthy of mature readers. He that hath ears, let him hear. The rabbits of Watership Down have a deceptively complex culture, replete with their own religious system. Among other things, they believe in a mythological proto-rabbit, an rabbit by the name of El Araira. El Araira is an incarnation of rabbit perfection, exemplifying the best things of all things bunny. He is called the Prince of Rabbits, and once offered his life as a sacrifice to save his entire race. He is venerated by all rabbits who retell his stories, passing them down as both history and wisdom from generation to generation. Now, early in the novel, our intrepid rabbit sojourners happen upon another tribe of rabbits. But these new rabbits are unlike the other rabbits. They have evolved a very different type of culture. The new rabbits act oddly by normal rabbit standards. They are somewhat aloof. It might be even fair to say that sometimes they act a little elitist. They are unusually large and well-fed, suggesting that they are a relatively wealthy tribe as far as rabbits define wealth. They have an affinity and appreciation for art and music that never ever truly developed in other rabbits. They are basically leaderless. They organize as a kind of anarcho-syndicalist commune. They proudly buck tradition, but they still have an odd, if not somewhat condescending, respect for the old ways. They maintain the form of their rabbit religion, but not the substance of its theology. For example, in their burrow, the new rabbits have erected a mosaic, basically a stained glass frame, of the Messiah rabbit, El Araira. It is a depiction of a famous scene from one of the great rabbit myths. But these new rabbits no longer remember the myth itself because they don't tell the old stories anymore. Instead of repeating the old stories, which often celebrated the cheating of death through typical rabbit cunning and trickery, these rabbits instead recite poems. Poems that don't celebrate the cheating of death, but rather elevate the idea of nobly accepting and embracing the inevitability of death. Y'all, these are Unitarian Universalist rabbits. Old school, predominantly humanist UU rabbits. When the traditionalist rabbits, the protagonists of the novel, finally share with these new rabbits the original story of El Araira depicted in their mosaic, the new rabbits respond with sentiments like, "Oh, very nice, yes, very nice. An unusual tale. I always think these traditional stories retain a lot of charm, especially when they're told in the real old-fashioned spirit." The traditionalist rabbits eventually come to realize the very real danger posed to them by these new rabbits. After listening to a poet among the new rabbits recite a beautiful, melancholic elegy on nature and the importance of accepting one's ultimate fate, a particularly astute member of the traditionalist rabbits, recognizing the imminent threat represented by this new religion, goes into an existential panic and tries to claw his way to escape. The threat he senses is not that these new rabbits are spreading a lie. The threat is that they are spreading the truth, a terrible truth. But it is not the truth that he revolts against. Rather, he revolts against the potential folly this truth could engender. He declares to his comrades, "That's the worst part of it. There isn't any trick. The poet speaks the truth. So long as he speaks the truth, it can't be folly. That's what you're going to say, isn't it? But a thing can be true and still be desperate folly." In our free and responsible search for truth and meaning, there may indeed be a desperate folly in forsaking the old stories. We need those stories, and we need to take them, if not literally, then at least seriously. There is still much to be gained by occasionally going back to the old stories, rummaging through the dusty old boxes, sifting through the rubble, finding something of value left behind among the shards of a shattered faith, something we can recycle or upcycle or resurrect. So this morning, I want to go back to that old Easter story. I want to remember the old truths it once taught me, viewed perhaps under a new light. I must start by looking at the Easter story through a decidedly Christian lens. It is, after all, a Christian story, so I think that appropriate. Per traditional Christian beliefs, the Easter story, abstractly speaking, is the story of humankind seizing God, placing God on trial, finding God guilty, executing God for his sins, and then watching that broken, dead God come back to life. As I noted earlier, versions of this story appear in the histories, mythologies, religions, and philosophies of countless cultures. It seems we human beings love to murder God. It happens over and over again, and each time it happens, we are forced to confront the terrible realization so aptly articulated by Friedrich Nietzsche. God is dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murders? What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it? Nietzsche spoke narrowly of that which I am speaking to more broadly this morning. Nevertheless, I find his words a useful reminder of the gravity of what we humans so often do, what so often must be done, and the theological consequences we must face in the wake of those actions. If we understand the term God in the broadest sense, not simply as an invisible man in the sky, but rather that which imbues ultimate meaning and value to each of our lives, our highest ideal, the North Star of our moral and ethical questing, that which we elevate and recognize as sacred and holy and ineffable, that purpose greater than ourselves to be gladly served above all else. That great cause we hold up and aloft as worthy of worship and sacrifice. Understood in these terms, we have all had to kill our gods at one time or another. Now, if you don't understand what I'm saying, if these words don't quite resonate, if it sounds like I'm speaking a slightly different language, it may simply be because you have never had to crucify your God yet. If you don't understand me today, don't worry. Someday you will. But rest assured, God will come back, just like before, just as he always has, because nature hates a vacuum. What the story of Easter teaches me is that when hope is gone, when the night has reached its darkest point, when I have had to put to death by my own hand my understanding of things, my old preconceptions, all that gave my life meaning and direction, when God is dead and I am utterly lost, so long as I keep moving, I will eventually find an empty tomb. And if I keep moving still onward, I will eventually find or be found by my God. A risen God, but a changed God, a transformed God, a transmogrified God. God comes back so very different that you will inevitably fail to recognize him at first. Recall that Mary Magdalene at first mistook Jesus for a gardener. On the road to Emmaus, two of Jesus' disciples spent the afternoon walking and talking with him, but did not recognize him until they broke bread together that evening. Peter and the other disciples went out fishing when Jesus from the shore began talking to them, and they did not recognize him until he helped them land a miraculous haul of fish. Doubting Thomas refused to recognize Jesus until he could run his finger across the scars of his body, scars that he was complicit in creating. If there is a lesson here in all of this, I think it is this: never give up hope. Never stop looking or walking toward the horizon. But know that the answer to your prayers may end up looking nothing like what you expected. They may bear little similarity to the truths you once knew. Therefore, keep your eyes and ears, your heart and mind open. This Easter morning, we celebrate the rebirth of life in spring from the death of winter, the reappearance of light from darkness, the birth of hope from despair, the ending of a chapter and the beginning of a new story, the return of a dead God from the ashes in whatever form he, she, it, or they choose to take. Old things are passed away. Behold, all things are become new. Christ is risen. Blessed be.